Hello, this is Bad Vibes. Today's topic is pregnancy horror stories. My wife and I recently had our third kid, and I would always be paranoid at work if I hadn't heard from her for a while, so I decided to make a video on this topic. Cynical, I know. Please hit the like button if you enjoy, and sit back and relax. Background: I was 26 at the time, pregnant, and I lived in a very rural area. Tom had always been friends with my friends throughout high school. He was a quiet art kid who had insane natural talent. Seemed nice enough, but despite always wearing a smile, he just gave people, mostly girls, the feeling that something was off with him. I never spent a lot of one-on-one time with him because of this, but I never really had any reason to believe that he was dangerous. Just weird. Anyways, years after high school, I reconnect with my high school sweetheart, Jamie, who happens to be best friends with Tom. Everything was going great for Jamie and I. We got married, started a family. We're remodeling an old family home on acres of land that was our own. The dream. By then, Tom had been a regular at greetings. I noticed more and more that he had a weapons fascination and also liked to brag on himself. Obviously, obnoxious, but still nothing made me feel threatened. Tom by this time had been married to a woman who was old enough to be his mother. These two were not a healthy, cohesive couple. Super codependent, manipulative, and apparently they had gotten physical with one another. In the midst of this, Tom had started drinking and lying about his drinking, getting 2 DWIs, and even showing up to our house drunk. Jamie eventually told him to show up sober or not to come over at all. I was about 3 months pregnant and he didn't want that at our house. Time goes by, no word from Tom. That is until about 3 months since the last visit. He calls my husband wanting to chat and sounds very depressed. I'm about 6 months along at this time. Jamie hasn't come by and they chat outside. Tom wants to leave his wife, good for him, but something isn't right, even more so than normal. Jamie sneaks through Tom's scooter while Tom had came inside to use our restroom. He finds a stashed bottle of vodka. While Jamie is still outside, Tom all of a sudden doesn't have to use the restroom anymore. He turns to me and looks me up and down, so cold and expressionless. You know, Jess, women are most beautiful when they're pregnant. You've never looked more gorgeous. He makes a move closer to me. By this time, Jamie is walking in. Come outside, we need to talk. Shortly afterwards, I hear Tom leave and Jamie comes in to tell me about the alcohol. I tell him about the creepy comment and we both agree that he can't be trusted. He was not welcome here until he got help. Tom stopped calling, no text, nothing. Jamie reached out to make sure he was okay, with no response. From what we heard from his family, he was okay, just working and staying busy trying to keep sober. We really hoped that he was taking care of himself. 2 months later, I'm 8 months pregnant. I'm no longer working, and Jamie works 6 days a week. That's a lot of time alone. His schedule was always the same, and it's not changed in years. Tom randomly shows up at our house at 10 a.m. on a day he knew Jamie worked, so I was confused. I usually napped around this time because I was huge and tired. Luckily, I was awake this time and in the front room. This room has a huge window that faces the driveway, and the door to my right leads to our garage. I shot him a nervous wave through the window. He didn't seem to see me and was grabbing something out of a duffel bag on his scooter. He pulled out a shotgun. I know there's fight or flight, but I just froze. He grabbed a bottle and took a swig from it, guessing whiskey because of the bottle and the color. Then he finally notices me, sheer horror on my face. In return, I get a hateful look. He says something I can't hear, then smiles. Not a happy smile, packs up his gun and leaves. I immediately called Jamie. He works close, and the police take forever to get where we live. He didn't answer. I totally freaked out while checking the logs. Jamie calls back about 10 minutes later, and as we're talking, Jamie's dad, who lives just down the road, calls. Tom tried to break into his home. Thankfully, James' dad is always armed. He caught him red-handed, but didn't call the cops because of the long-standing relationship with Tom's family. Apparently, Tom hadn't had his gun out when he was caught, so Jamie's dad didn't feel threatened enough to call the cops. Not happy about that. Wasn't my choice. Don't worry, I called the cops myself later that day. That alone was scary and super confusing, but what Jamie told me later really freaked me out. When I was working, I worked a set schedule except the occasions I had been called in. One day, a month prior to my incident, Jamie called in sick and I, coincidentally, was called into work. I hated leaving him sick, but duty called. Jamie said he had been napping a little after 9 due to his high fever. He had woken up at some point to the sound of the door opening and closing, but he was so out of it that he figured it must have been his fever. What woke him up and kept him at least semi-alert was the bell on our bedroom door. Our dog jiggles it to potty in the morning, and FYI, this dog is overly friendly. He'd be the dog to show the intruder the most valuable stuff to steal. He heard it jingle twice, lightly. He vaguely remembers looking up and seeing what looked like Tom at the end of our bed, staring at him. He said he passed out from the fever getting worse and came to not very long after. By then, Tom was gone, so Jamie figured it was just a fever dream messing with him. After the gun incident though, he wasn't so sure anymore. It's been over 2 years and we make no attempts to talk to Tom. He used to drive by from time to time, but never tried to make contact. I still make sure all my locks and windows are secure throughout the day. Tom, let's not meet ever again. Trigger warning for this story, as it has some details of domestic assault and abuse. My mother just told me this and I'm still in a bit of shock. My mother is strong, independent, and hardworking. She worked her ass off as a sergeant in the army until she was honorably discharged after she was raped by a fellow sergeant. They wanted to keep it hush-hush, which in my opinion was messed up. She went on to work at a maximum security prison in Georgia. This is where she met my father, who was also a corrections officer. When they first met, they bonded over basketball. My mom was somewhat of a star in high school, but a lot of college scouts overlooked her because of her height and color. He was able to go to college for it until he hurt his knee and had to drop out and search for a different career. She says everything was great. They were the it couple, a beautiful couple. She still says that he was one of the most handsome men she has ever saw. She compares him to the singer Maxwell. He was smart, fit, charming, and funny. Life was perfect until he moved in with her a year into the relationship. Then everything went downhill. Someday she would come home from work to find him in a drunken stupor, lines of coke spread out over our coffee table. They would argue. She would toss out his bottles of Jack. He would smack her across the face, beat her throughout the nights. She would have no choice but to go into work the next day, sore with bruises on her face and black eyes. Her neighbors and coworkers knew what was going on, but turned a blind eye. But the warden even threatened to fire her, saying it wasn't good for inmates to see her like that. So she decided to kick him out, cut all ties, get an order of protection against him, until she found out that she was pregnant. She put off breaking up with him for a while, working doubles as not to go home, basically living at the prison. Ironically, she only felt safe there. One day she went home and he was there, sober for once. She told him about the pregnancy. By then she was about 2 months along. He went off, saying he wasn't ready for a child. He demanded she get an abortion. He gave her money for it the next day before he went to work. Instead of an abortion, she spent the money he gave to her at the mall. When she got home, he asked if she had got it done. She said no, explaining that she was 32. She wasn't getting any younger, and she always wanted a child. She was ready to raise one with or without him. He glared at her, his eyes full of hatred. If looks could kill, she would have dropped dead right there. He just nodded and said, "Fine, keep it," and stomped off to bed. She was surprised. She thought he would have went off on her. She began to feel hopeful. Maybe he would stop abusing her, stay sober, and they could live happily again. She dismissed the glare as just her imagination and followed him to bed. She had work early the next day. Sometime during the night, she woke up to find him leaning over her, holding a huge knife to her throat. The evil look in his eyes from before. "You don't want to do what I tell you, bitch? I'll cut that fucking baby out of you right now." They fought, rolling over the bed and crashing on the floor. Somehow, she was able to knock the knife out of his hand, and it rolled under the bed, out of his reach. He then picked her by her hair and threw her against the wall, punching her repeatedly in the stomach, chest, and face. She did the only thing that she could do and kicked him in the crotch as hard as she could. He let out a yelp and dropped to his knees. "You fucking bitch," he hollered, cupping his balls. My mom says she quickly grabbed her car keys and ran out of the bedroom. Her stomach felt like it was on fire. It hurt so bad, and she could barely see. Her head ached from hitting it when they fell off the bed. She got into the living room, wanted to grab her purse before she left. She was trying to feel around for it, but couldn't find it. My father must have worked through his pain because my mom says he soon followed her. "You're not leaving," he said, heading towards the kitchen. My mom said she felt a shiver run through her body. She knew if she didn't leave right then, she would die that night. She knew that he was going for another knife. She also knew that she wouldn't be able to make it to the front door since the kitchen was right next to it. There's no way that she could run to the door before he got her, not in her condition. She felt like she was going to pass out any second. She heard my father rummaging through the kitchen, calling her all types of names. She threw open the living room window, pushed out the screen, and climbed out. She hung from her hands, closed her eyes, began praying as she let herself drop. She fell into one of those large air conditioning things that you usually see outside, landing on her knees and elbows. She said it hurt like a bitch, but she was alive. Thanking God, she crawled off and limped to the parking lot where her car was. She drove off, never looking back. She left that whole life behind, her pretty condo, her friends, a job she loved, and escaped to New York where my grandmother lived. All because of my father, a man she loved and someone she thought loved her back. Edit. Thank you all for the kind words and PMs. I showed my mom this morning and she started crying. Don't worry, it's happy tears. Seeing such kind comments from complete strangers just warmed her heart. A lot of you asked how she's doing now. She still has her bad days, but she's much happier. She's a counselor at the VA hospital for vets who come back dealing with issues, drug addiction, PTSD, etc. She loves her job and she loves helping others. She feels like she's making a difference in the world. Still overprotective, but I understand it's only because she's scared of whatever could happen to me. As for my dad, my mother told me today that he was just released from prison this year after doing a few years for robbery. Hopefully he dropped the soap or something a few times. My husband was at work. I was 5 months pregnant. I was pretty small, and my belly hadn't popped yet. Other women who have been pregnant understand. One day you'll wake up and your belly is just huge. But I still was clearly pregnant with a bump. Let me preface this with the fact that we lived in one of the most upscale areas in our state. I went to take the dog out and noticed a boy 20 or so who was going from building to building in our apartment complex, walking down the halls and coming back out. It was an outdoor complex, so when I took my dog out, I could see multiple halls that he was pacing through. At first, I thought maybe he was trying to find a friend's unit, but he was acting a little manic, so that put up a red flag. He started walking towards my building, so I immediately started walking towards the apartment without making it obvious where I lived. There were 2 hallway entries in the building adjacent from each other. It was a 3-story building, so I figured even if I'm walking towards my apartment, as long as he's not close enough, he won't be able to tell which unit I live in. As I'm walking back, he's probably about 10 feet from me, and he whistles. Immediately, I'm freaking out, but he ends up walking down the adjacent hall. I get to my apartment and lock the door. A few minutes later, after thinking there's no way he could have figured out which unit is mine, I'm warming up some food and get a horrible feeling, like an instinct. So I look out the peephole and he's literally on the other side, facing against the door, like he's listening. Immediately, I call the cops, then my husband. I grab the knife and open the window just in case somehow he could break in. We live on the 2nd story. Luckily, the cops showed up, and maybe he heard me call them because the kid was gone before he could do anything serious. After that, my husband and I bought a gun for our own protection. Gun control is a major issue in our country right now, but it can also help save lives. Had the person broken in, I felt helpless to protect myself and my daughter. I and my family decided to spend the New Year's with some friends of the family to ring in 2015. There are 3 big families that we are pretty close to, so there were about 20 of us there. The family hosting us that night made this huge, wonderful meal, and we were all so excited. The hostess, to avoid confusion, we will call her Maria. We were lounging around the house waiting for Maria's husband, son, and son-in-law to come home from work, and we were having a good time. Maria's son-in-law came home, and it turned out he invited a friend from work to join in the festivities. Everyone was welcoming and tried to make him comfortable. I began to notice that I kept catching the friend's eye ever since he showed up. I was pregnant. One of the dads there took notice and began to bring up my pregnancy, obviously with the intention of letting the friend know that in my condition, I was certainly not looking to hook up. This plan backfired. The friend began to give me pregnancy advice and talking about his children, and his eyes began to shine a way a person does when they are becoming aroused. This made me very, very uncomfortable, and I decided to just avoid the friend for the night. It didn't matter where I was, he would do his damn best to keep me in his line of sight and would not take his eyes off of me for any length of time. Even though I was in deep conversations with Pedro, who, God bless him, did his best to try to distract the friend from me and make sure that he was not near me. Eventually, around 11 p.m., we all decided we wanted coffee in true Hispanic fashion. And when Maria mentioned she had cake mix, I volunteered to make the cake so we would have something sweet to eat with our coffee. At that point, the friend was fidgeting like mad. He looked like he was on drugs. He suddenly gets up as I was about to crack the eggs and got so close to me that he had me pinned against himself in the section of the counter. He was so close to me and starts giving me advice on how to make a cake. This cake is from a fucking box. I've done it millions of times. I start to tell him this and he keeps talking over me and presses his crotch on me so I can feel that he's rock hard and gives me that look. I'm so nauseous, uneasy, and annoyed at this point that I say, "Look, I've done this a million times and don't need your help." Thankfully, he can see perfectly into the kitchen from the family den, from the waist up, so he finally gave up and went back to the den. Many more things happened throughout the night that made me want to throw up, like the New Year's hug when he tried to fill me up. I have nothing against people with pregnancy fetishes. I can understand that people have sexual preferences, but this guy clearly didn't get the hint that I was not interested and did not care that I was carrying someone else's child in my womb. I found it to be a sickening thing that he would do this to a pregnant woman. I hope I never meet him again. I was 20 years old at the time. I was about 7 or 8 months pregnant with my daughter, and I needed to stop to get makeup from the dollar store on my way home from work. I've done it 1,000 times. I mean, this dollar store is literally 3 minutes from my house, and is my go-to store when I need something fast and cheap. Well, I go in, I start browsing. It's a dollar store, for God's sakes, like I was actually gonna leave with just makeup. I notice this guy walking behind me. No big deal, right? He's probably doing the same thing I'm doing, looking at junk. So I grab a few things, throw them into my basket, all while dude was casually following me down aisle after aisle, looking at the junk. Eventually I move into the makeup aisle. I'm standing there trying to decide which $5 foundation I was gonna butcher next, and I kid you not, this man is suddenly standing next to me in the freaking makeup aisle. And by next to me I mean less than a foot away, looking at lip stain. Now at first I wasn't concerned. Again, it's a dollar store, and people are weird, but something about him being that close to me in that moment really wigged me out. Here I am, 5'2", very pregnant post-teen, essentially a watermelon person who struggles to walk, let alone run more than 20 feet at a time, without stopping to catch my breath. Of course, the only thing going through my head was, Jesus, I'm too tired to be fucking kidnapped right now. Which at the time, I thought was a joke. Who would even want to snatch a pregnant lady? I doubt I'd even fit in their van. Imagine the abundance of inconvenience, non-criminally consistent bathroom breaks. That would really put a damper on their plans. You know, all those dumb, unrealistic thoughts that you think and try to make yourself feel less weird in a weird situation. Anyway, I acknowledge that this guy is creeping, and I grabbed the last foundation bottle I looked at, not caring if it was even the right color, and went to the counter to check out. Dude followed me again. He was right behind me in line, with absolutely no merchandise. Guess he ended up buying a candy bar or something from the counter. I paid for my crap and immediately called my fiance before walking out of the store. I made a point to state somewhat loudly that I needed him to stay on the phone with me until I pulled out of the parking lot. I was pretty freaked out at this point, but I made it to my car and got out of the parking lot. Cool, almost home. Happened to glance from my rearview mirror at the red light, and this guy was, I shit you not, right behind me in his car. Cue watermelon person tears and absolute panic. Ended up pulling into a gas station. Dude followed me in there too. My fiance's best friend was managing, and I ended up walking into his office, and dude finally left 15 minutes later. My fiance's friend wanted to call the police, but I was tired and high off of pregnancy hormones. I wasn't sure if this guy was actually following me, or if I was just overreacting and paranoid. I didn't want to get this guy in trouble for just running errands or whatever, so I convinced him not to. Thinking about this now, post-watermelon, I probably should have let him call. So this story is a bit of a long story from several years ago when I worked at a fast food chain that served barbecue. I clearly remember this because it was just so weird. My parents owned the business, so they allowed me to work there whenever I wanted. At the time, I was 14 years old, but I had purple hair because I had had identity issues, I guess. So I looked a lot older than I actually was, but I was still only about 5'4". One night, I'm working on a Saturday night with only one other girl, a little older than me, trying to get started on closing since we close in about an hour. It was 8 p.m. and fully dark outside. It was completely silent. Usually you can hear cars pull up, and you could definitely see them as the walls were covered in windows. I'm just sweeping up when I see something move out of the dark. I look up, and in the back of our parking lot is a man in all dark clothes just looking inside. No car in sight. I think it's weird, but people are like that sometimes. About 10 minutes later, the door squeaks open really quickly, and it made me jump because it was loud. It was a very large, tall man wearing black scrubs with a scraggly beard. At this point, I'm annoyed because it's like 40 minutes before close and it's super hard to close this restaurant. But I put my biggest fake smile on and say like usual, "Hi, welcome to..." Nothing. No words for what felt like 5 minutes. Then a woman wearing the same clothes came in, and the lady looks like the guy's twin. So they come up to the front counter to order, and I say, "What can I get for you today? Do y'all have fortune cookies?" No sir, we only sell barbecue and sides." "That's too bad. We brought our own anyway. I want a large sweet tea." "So no fortune cookies here?" "No ma'am." At this point, she actually was really mad that we didn't have fortune cookies. Then no food for me. That was their whole order, just a large drink. They paid and sat down at one of the empty tables. The man had been carrying a computer bag with him, so I thought maybe he had to do some work real quick. But no, he opens his bag and pulls out a whopping handful of fortune cookies. Like, at least 30. They're both very silent and it's really creeping me out. As I'm sweeping under the table next to them, the guy says, without ever looking in my direction, "We use these numbers from the cookies to play the lottery every day." "Oh, that's really cool." "No, it's not. It's serious. We didn't do it one night, and it was the winning numbers. We could have won $2,000. We cried for months." Oh, little 14-year-old me didn't know what to say, so I just kept sweeping. "Now we run an acupuncture shop in the next town over. We can cure everything." "Awesome." At this point, I'm sweeping towards the back of the store. I'm facing away from them because they're already creeping me out, and I was hoping that they would just stop talking. "I don't think you think I'm serious." His voice got really loud all of a sudden, like he was yelling at me, and now he was looking at me. They both looked really pissed at me for some reason, but I didn't want to say any more, so I kept quiet. "We cure everything. Smoking habits, cured. Back pain, cured. Chronic headaches, cured." He is actually screaming at me now, and my coworker had been in the walk-in cooler, so she heard nothing. I'm starting to walk into the kitchen, but I had to pass him to get there, and to a phone. As I'm walking past, he stares me down. At this point, I'm absolutely terrified, and I don't know what to do, so I start to call my parents. Before I could even grab my phone, this man is suddenly right behind me. "We even help ladies get pregnant." He said this a little louder than a whisper, and this sent shivers all the way down my spine that I actually froze. The man walks back towards the table, and I take off downstairs to my coworker. I decided the best option was to lock ourselves in the office and wait until they left. Eventually we came out and they were gone. There isn't really a good ending to this, cause that's all there was. I told my parents and they came and got me. We tried looking up acupuncture places in the town he said he was from, but there weren't any for another 60 miles away. A year later, I'm at a gas station down the street from the restaurant and I'm filling up when a man came back to his car which was beside me. I didn't pay him much attention until he said, "What a nice day outside. A good day for some acupuncture." I looked up and I shit you not, it was the same creepy dude from the night. I said, "Yep," and promptly stopped filling up my car and drove away. I don't know if this guy recognized me or what, but to that creepy guy that wanted me to get pregnant at 14 years old, let's not meet.